All right, today we are going to review some decimals, percentages, and proportions that you learned in the 7th grade. So let's start by thinking about this word percent. So it's a word that we hear all the time. You probably use it a lot, but let's think about what it means. So you've got this word per. So per means for every. So for example, if you can only have 3 rolls of toilet paper per household, that means 3 rolls of toilet paper for every household. So per we can think of as for every. And then this word cent, if we think about where we hear that cent, there are 100 cents in a dollar. There are 100 years in a century. So that cent refers to 100. So we can think of the word percent as meaning for, well, let me write very well here. Sorry about that. For every 100. So what we've got to worry about today is we need to learn about changing from a decimal to a percent to a fraction or a proportion here. So since a percent means for every 100, if we have 26%, then we could write that as 26 out of 100. And of course, 26 over 100 is going to reduce because you could divide both of those numbers by 2. So if you wanted to, you could also write this as the fraction 13 over 50 by dividing that top number by 2 and the bottom number by 2. So if we have something like this, if we have 13% and we want to write it as a fraction, we can write that as 13 over 100. That will not reduce. Maybe we have something like 75%, and we could write that as 75 over 100. And of course that will reduce because you could divide the top and the bottom of this fraction by 25. So that would be 3 fourths if you reduce it. Sometimes you have decimals in your fraction, so in your percent. So maybe you've got 1.2%. Well, that would be 1.2 over 100. Now, that is a fraction that includes a decimal. We really don't like to do that. So what we could do is we could multiply the top by 10 and the bottom by 10 just by moving this decimal over once, which means we got to take the decimal in the bottom and move it over once as well. So this would equate to 12 over, we're going to put a 0 in that spot right there, over 1,000. And you can also do this on Desmos if that confuses you a little bit. So on Desmos, if you do 1.2 divided by 100, notice we get a decimal here, which is nice. And then we can hit the fraction button. Now, this actually changed this to 3 over 250 because Desmos is going to automatically reduce. And I neglected to reduce here because I can divide 12 by 4, and I can also divide 1,000 by 4, which is going to give me 3 over 250, which is what Desmos gives you. So if I had 0.06%, that would be 0.06 over 100. I could move that decimal 2 places to the right to get rid of it, which means I got to move the decimal 2 places to the right in the bottom as well. So I add zeros right there. So that's going to give me 6 over 10,000. And both of those numbers are divisible by 2. So if I want to reduce it, I could divide by 2 here and divide by 2 here. And that is going to give me 3. So I'm running out of room here. Let me move this down a little bit. So that'll be 3 out of 5,000. And you can always check on Desmos to make sure you got it right. If you do 0.06 divided by 100, then you're going to get this decimal. If you hit the fraction key, you get 3 over 5,000. So to change a percent to a decimal, let's summarize right here. To change a percent to a, not decimal, but to a fraction, just put the number over 100 and simplify if necessary. I'm going to move that over here so we can see it a little bit better. Okay, percent to a, let's now do a percent to a decimal. Percents to decimals are so simple. And just, we'll show you right here. So let's say that we've got 27%. So that, let's think of a fraction. 27 divided by 100 would be our fraction. Well, if we're going to divide something by 100, all it's going to do is it's going to take the decimal in the problem, which 27 doesn't have a decimal, and it's just going to move that decimal 2 places to the left. So this would be 0.27 as a decimal. So if I have something like 38%, I would just take the decimal. There's no decimal in 38, which means 38 is right here. And I would move that 2 places to the left. And so this would equal 0.38 for my decimal. Now, what if I've only got a single number? What if I've got 7%? Well, I still want to move that decimal 2 places to the left. That's what I do when I divide by 100. So I'm going to move this 2 places. There's my new decimal. And any blank spots, I've got to fill that in with a 0. So 7% would equal 0.07 as my decimal. What if I have a bigger number? What if I have 283%? So your decimal is right here at the end. You're going to move that 2 places to the left, and that is going to give you 2.83 as your decimal here. So to go from a percent to a decimal, let's summarize here. To change from a percent to a decimal, move the decimal 2 places to the left. Okay. All right. So let's also go decimal to percent. So this time, let's say that I have 0.04, and I want to know what percentage that is. Well, this is just the opposite of what we were doing. So you're going to multiply by 100 or move that decimal 2 places to the right. So in this case, we take this decimal, we move it 2 places to the right, and we will get 4%. Those zeros in front of the 4 are not necessary to write there. So if I have 0.63 and I want to change that to a percent, I'm just moving that decimal 2 places to the right, which is going to give me 63%. What about if I have something like this, 0.1? I only have one number there. So I still must move my decimal 2 places to the right. 1, 2. And remember, with those blank spots right there, we're going to fill that in with a 0. So whenever I'm looking for what percent this is, I'm going to get 10%. 28%. That 0 in front's not necessary to write. Sometimes I have bigger numbers like this. I might have 2.81 and I want to know what percent that is. So again, I'm going to move that decimal 2 places to the right and I'm going to get 281%. So to summarize here, to change from a decimal to a percent, move the decimal 2 places to the right. And let's make that a little bit smaller so that it will show up where you can read it there. Okay. Now, we do need to be able to go from a fraction to a decimal. And so we'll be using the calculator for all of these. So whenever we have an example like this, 28 over 62, to change that to a decimal, we've just got to divide. So we'll be using the calculator for these. So if I pull up Desmos real quick, we're just going to do 28 divided by 62, and it's automatically going to give us a decimal. Now in this case, I've got a rather long decimal there, so 0.451 and so on. Keep at least 3 decimal places there. If I have something like 2/3, you should already know what 2/3 is, but if we need to verify here, if you just do 2 divided by 3, notice you get that 6 is repeating. Desmos is rounding that last one up to a 7, but it's just rounding because it can only display so many numbers. So to write that, we could write it 0.6, and we could put this line over the top that tells us that 6 is repeating. So when we write it this way, that means 0.66666, and that keeps on going forever. Okay, so to summarize there, to go from fraction to decimal, just divide. Okay, so that's all you'll need to do there. And we need to be able to go, let's see, have we done everything? Decimal to fraction, we also need to be able to do, so for a decimal to a fraction, we are just going to use the structure of numbers that we have. So whenever we have a decimal, like let's say we've got 0.13721. So we call this place right here our tenths place. This one is our hundredths. This one is our thousandths. And then this one here would be 10 thousandths. This would be 100 thousandths. And so on. So, for example, if I have 0.4, that is 4 tenths. That is in my tenths place. So that means 4 over 10. Of course, 4 over 10 will reduce to 2/5, right? If I have 0.21, this is now 21 hundredths. So I would write 21 over 100. And I don't think that that will reduce, so we would just leave that like it is. I don't really need that equal sign there. Let's say we had something like 0.341. Well, this is 341 thousandths. So we would take 341 and put it over 1,000. I don't think that will reduce either. So you can kind of see the picture here. If you just got one decimal place, you got 1 0 right here. If you got 2 decimal places, you got 2 zeros. If you have 3 decimal places, you have 3. And then that would continue on, of course, as you went. Sometimes you can reduce these numbers, sometimes you cannot. So I think that covers most everything that you will need to know in as far as converting. Make sure you answer all the questions at the end of this video, and we will work more with this as we look at percents more in detail tomorrow.